Hello everybody. Thank you for joining us for the Barcoding Bootcamp webinar with Panatrack and Turnkey. Today we're looking at how barcoding solutions enable your organization to maintain up-to-date, accurate product and inventory data in Dynamics GP. For those of us joining for the first time, this webinar is part of an ongoing series we conduct with our partners to help keep you informed of how you can extend and further automate your Dynamics GP solution. So thanks again for taking the time to hop on today and learn more about it with us. My name is Brad Vorbeck. I work in marketing here at Turnkey, and with us also is Michael Burnham from Panatrack, and he's going to be your presenter today. As always, if you do have questions, feel free to submit them via your GoToWebinar panel, and I will put them in a queue, and during at the end we'll get a Q&A session going and get those answered. Finally, we record all our webinars, so you can view those at turnkeytec.com/videos. And feel free to pass those around to your colleagues who might be interested in this information as well. And thank you again for joining us today, and I will go ahead and let Michael take it away. Michael?
Thanks, Brad. As Brad said, my name is Mike Burnham. I'm president of Panatrack, and this afternoon I'm going to give you a quick course in the important points of integrating barcoding into your business, whether that be for inventory, warehouse management, or fixed asset control. So I'll be talking about the different kinds of barcodes, what sort of data they represent, how they're best printed, the hardware to scan them, and how to integrate them into your ERP system. And for, I think, all of us, all of our ERP system of choice here is Dynamics GP. So let's get started. Okay. So the first thing I want to do here is I want to begin with the end in mind and consider the question, what is it we're attempting to gain by barcoding? And the thing that we're really trying to get at here is an instant and foolproof way to capture data. We want to be able to remove errors that arise typically whenever someone takes a document and writes on it and then reads it and then later goes to another computer and keys it in order to capture the information that was originally part of an action that probably occurred several minutes or hours ago. And we also shift the responsibility of tracking that to where it really belongs, typically and hopefully to the person that's either standing over a piece of inventory or that's in front of a specific asset for which we want to gain better control. So when we get this, because of this, we get an accurate view of our inventory or assets that is up to date, has the correct items, the correct quantities, and the correct locations on it. So I do want to ask a couple of questions here, I guess, for you to give some consideration to as to whether or not you're experiencing these specific warning signs. On an inventory standpoint or on an asset standpoint, are you relying on people to just know what it is that you have and where it's located? Are you potentially handwriting on paper-based forms in order to capture some of this important information? And on the inventory side and also on the asset side as well, are you potentially ignoring lot or serial data because it's painful to manually track? So if you're dealing with something in a medical or a food facility, then chances are you have lot information that's very important for you to capture, and you may not be doing that at this point in time just because it can be quite difficult to do that. Likewise, if you tend to be in a more discrete manufacturing, a discrete distribution, or if you're dealing with fixed assets, important serial data that uniquely identifies that item is also difficult to manually track because you're writing this all down. And in the last circumstance as well, too, are you not using the oldest lot or serial items because you simply aren't capturing that information? So here's another warning sign. Are you keeping what we like to call nervous inventory? And by that we mean, is your on-hand inventory higher than needed because you don't have full confidence in the numbers that you have? So in other words, are you keeping excess inventory because you're just a little concerned that it takes 8 hours for somebody to write it down on a piece of paper and for that traveling document to make its way back to the office, and your sales guys might have already tried to sell something in the process? Well, the implications of doing that is that you're trapping excess dollars in inventory. You're also potentially using more warehouse space than is needed, and in that specific circumstance, it doesn't hurt as much if you own all your warehousing, but for many companies, they're in outside storage, and they may pay by square foot for anything else that's there. So more than just wasting and keeping dollars trapped in inventory, you may also be losing dollars by renting space that may not actually be fully needed. And then the last implication on this one is because you're carrying excess inventory, it's possible that some of those products may become obsolete or expire before you can sell or use them. Even more, are you only tracking at a warehouse level or in the asset scenario only at a building level because the detailed locations are too hard to manage. So what about aisles in a warehouse or bins in a warehouse? What about inventory or assets that might be on your trucks? What about things that might be on your job sites? Well, Dynamics GP can track by bin, but it's much easier when you add a barcode system because now you're going through a specific set of steps and you'll be able to scan an aisle marker or a bin marker or a truck number. So the implications there are that you're probably wasting time searching for your stuff. And here's one more. Do you know what happens to your inventory or why it happens? So GP gives you reason codes for adjustments. You should have your team use them. With that, you can wind up doing an adjustment that might say something like, I've removed it as a sample. I've removed it because I identify some damage. I'm using it for a job or for a service. And in a system such as ours, you can actually capture that job or service information so that you can close the loop to know exactly what's that for. Can you account for shrinkage, which I think everybody realizes that shrinkage is a polite way to say theft, but also unexplained inventory disappearances can be caused by several factors. So a fact that's been generally accepted is that inventory shrinkage tends to average 1.5% or so of sales. But inventory that's perceived as under control is less likely to be taken. Also, can you hold your staff accountable for the accuracy of the numbers? Do you know who performed the transaction and when it was done? And that can be critically important because then when you start shifting the responsibility of capturing accurate and timely data to the people that are actually interacting with the inventory, the product, the asset, then you can actually start closing and getting some additional controls. And then lastly, do you have someone that's dedicated to data entry? And if so, how long is the delay before that entry is made on a computer in the back office? And with that delay, what problems does it cause? And typically what it's causing is there's entry mistakes because somebody is entering in a number on a piece of paper and the person that's trying to record that later on can't tell, is that a 3, is that an 8, is it a B, maybe it's the symbol for pi. Is there also nervous inventory, as we said before, and also are you missing sales opportunity? So that data entry is both painful for a resource that could probably be better spent doing something else of a higher value. And how about assets? Well, assets and specifically some of the higher value ones that we track quite commonly through our system is things like laptops, tablets, servers, and the associated peripherals like keyboards and mice, etc. But also things like tools and portable equipment that are used by your team when they're performing a job, a service, a repair. And basically any of those expensive things that move around. And also, of course, traditionally what people were thinking is assets of machinery and furniture. So why tag these assets? Well, it simplifies the identification of that asset. It also discourages theft of the asset. And then it gives you an opportunity to tie that to a custodianship. So basically, who is assigned to this asset? Well, this laptop belongs to Mike, and this desk is the place where Alex sits, etc. And the other cause as well too is it makes auditors happy, which is quite often one of the things on an audit report that may come back is a concern that the assets that are being shown on your asset register may not actually match the reality that they can visibly see. So what data are we really capturing when we're talking about barcoding? Well, it's important to understand that a barcode simply represents an identity. It's a number that represents an item or an asset. It might be a location or a person, and it might be a document reference. In the cases here where you're looking at the barcodes that are on your screen in front of you, the barcode is representing literally what's called the human readable text underneath it. So in those cases, it's not including something like a price. It's not including something like a location. It's simply a code that's a key to a database record. But identifying something just isn't enough. We need one more thing. So a barcode alone doesn't tell you where is it. It doesn't tell you how many do I have. It just tells you what. What is it? What is that asset, that inventory, that bin, that location, that person? So a well-designed system captures what and a related action. So for example, item X123, it was sold. It was received. it was moved from section B11 to section B99. And in this case here, we're capturing what and a related action that has two pieces of data. Or it's an asset that was assigned to custodian Clark Kent. So the important thing to remember here is that identity plus its action is the way that you have control. So how does one capture that action? Well, it's important to realize that inventory movement doesn't occur in the office. It usually doesn't occur next to a computer in the warehouse either, no matter how long a tethered scanner you might want to try and attach to it. It happens at the receiving or the shipping dock. It happens in the warehouse aisle. It could happen on a production line. It could happen in a truck, on a job site, perhaps at a trade show, perhaps at your customer. So if you deal with anything like vendor-managed inventory or some of those sales where you're responsible for dealing with what's at your customer's site, taking the reader and taking that inventory system to them is an excellent way to gain control of that. So it's just much simpler. So what sort of inventory actions, for example, might we be talking about? Well, in our world, we tend to view things in terms of things that are in, things that come in, which you can see on the left side, and things that go out, which you can see on the right side. And the section that's in the lighter colored green are things that are happening as things are bouncing around under your control within your warehouse, within your plant or your office. So in this case, I'm dealing with inventory action. So if you look towards the left here, you'll see the receive from vendor. That's a pretty common way for anything to be introduced into your business is I've issued a purchase order for something and I'm going to receive it. So that's a transaction right there where you know that you have important data that you're capturing that would be a purchase order, items, a quantity, and then potentially depending on how you have those items set up in GP, you could be capturing lot information, you could be capturing serial information. So then let's consider the column in the center where here we're talking about the things that we do while this product is under our custodianship. So we may be moving it from the north warehouse to the south warehouse or from the warehouse in Atlanta to the warehouse in Milwaukee. We might be moving it bin to bin or aisle to aisle as we're trying to get better control over the space of our warehouse. And then we may also be performing some miscellaneous adjustments on it where, hey, I have discovered inventory from before I had, was taking careful control of the system. So maybe there's an add adjustment we want to make or a remove adjustment for the reasons that I previously mentioned. And then also a physical count process where we want to simplify the opportunity for someone to see what it is that they're counting and then be able to record that so that it has an instant action back to the host system. And then on the right column here where we're addressing out, there's usually two ways that inventory comes out of a business, and that's either because they're issuing it for the purpose of a job or a service or a general adjustment. So for example, if I'm a heating, ventilating, air conditioning company, I may be using it in the repair process for one of my customers. If I build bridges, I might wind up be using certain products in order to do that. Otherwise, what's common is fulfilling orders. So I built product and now I'm selling it to someone, or I've received product in and I'm distributing it to them. So all these key inventory transactions here are the ones that we really want to be able to capture the what and the action and then whatever other associated attributes are there. This is what it looks like for inventory. For fixed assets, one has to realize that the word fixed also implies the fact that they're not movable. So what do you do in the scenario here where any of these pieces of plant equipment here are identified? They're obviously expensive. So how does one keep control of those? The solution is to mobilize. So you want to bring the computer to the action. And obviously you don't want to bring a large computer. You don't want to bring a laptop. You want to bring a handheld wireless computer with an integrated scanner and hopefully a keyboard. And then you'll see why I indicate the keyboard here coming up. Now, there's a lot of opportunities to wind up using a consumer device, but we believe that this isn't the scenario where one should be using a phone unless somebody is doing very casual scanning, and I'll explain that also as well. We don't suggest that it's necessarily the case for an iPad either. So our suggestion is that you always consider using hardware suited for the proper task. In the case of warehouses and stockrooms, they need durability and efficiency. So what you need is a dedicated barcode scanner and a button. I think everybody has tried the experience before of using their cell phone to try and capture a barcode when you might be standing in the aisle of Best Buy, or you might be trying to do a certain lookup and you're trying to scan those barcodes, and or a QR code, for example, and if you're like me, it's a very frustrating process. You have to be just the right distance from what you're scanning, and you tend to do this telescoping arm trick until you finally can get the barcode read. That's not an efficient way for someone that's trying to scan several assets or trying to move inventory to always be angled at the right spot. And ergonomically, it's painful as well, too, because you usually can't hold that in a way that gets you to be able to enter the balance of the data quickly. So we believe you need a dedicated barcode scanner, one that's actually either an imager or a laser reader, and also that you don't have to search around for the button, so that you can have a hardware button that would be ready so that when you press it, you're able to get a scan. When you consider the environment in which you're using these too, you may have a phone that lasts, 4 hours, 8 hours if you're lucky. But instead, if you're using dedicated hardware for the task, what you're going to have is longer lasting batteries that can be quick swapped and have a hot spare ready so that you just pop it out and pop a new one in. So you reduce the total number of devices you need, or you address it so you can actually get an 8-hour shift out of it. You also need a cradle so that it's an easy thing to be able to get out of the way, keep upright, so that it's not damaged and it's charging. And then potentially, depending on how you operate your business, you might want a pocket holster for it. You might want a vehicle or fork truck mount. You may want a truck mount. We also think that it's important too, especially with so many of the most recent concerns over viruses that are coming in by way of the Android or iOS platforms or some of those other, that you have software that locks out distractions and meddling, because you don't want someone to wind up using your device to constantly be checking Facebook or to wind up looking up their email or doing anything else. And you also want to be able to lock it down so that someone isn't changing important network settings or other configurations that affect what the next person will be trying to do. We also believe that you need a hardware keyboard, because not everybody has got small thumbs, and I can't imagine giving the guy on the bottom right of this image here a tiny little phone and saying, here, make sure your thumbs are skinny enough here so that you can record the inventory that you're using on this assignment. So don't get me wrong, tablets or phones are okay if you're mostly viewing and querying data, but as I mentioned, scanning via a camera is a painful event. And it's important to remember too, durability is critical in the field or in the stockroom. So I do want to point out here that if you take a deep look at the numbers, you'll find out that consumer devices are not really cheaper, because a purpose-built device can be dropped without damage, meaning you're not replacing them as often. They don't require an expensive $100 OtterBox in order to protect that consumer phone. They have built-in scanners and swappable batteries. And that's an important fact because, granted, most phones now don't have the ability to easily swap their battery. But what we find is sometimes if people are starting out and they're trying to use one of those phone devices, they're buying a $500 barcode slide-in or sled, or they're buying a third-party dongle, which basically is something else that you hold in your other hand. Now you've taken what could be a one-handed safe thing to do into doing it into two hands, so that you're then scanning using your right hand and holding the phone in your left hand. And then we also want to be doing something where we can control distractions through lockdown software. The other thing to consider too is that something would have a long life and replacement parts, and that's typically the case when you wind up looking at some of these consumer devices. At these industrial devices. So overall cost is less because it's already in there. And they're optimized for this exact task. And one of the things I will bring to your attention is long-range scanning. So some of the devices are capable of scanning barcodes at a greater distance, so that if you are standing in an aisle and you want to be able to scan the marker that you've put close to your ceiling above all where all the racking is, so that you can scan one of those barcodes, you do need to consider that you'll need a long-range scanner. And many of the scanners, the industrial scanners, do come with that option. And you can scan a barcode that's 35 feet away if everything is properly formatted. The other thing is you're not replacing them every other year as well too. So I think I made my point on why we favor using the proper industrial devices over some of the consumer devices for most of the scenarios in which you would be putting these into a warehouse. So addressing that, where do we put the data? So the question we want to address here is, what is your system of truth? Is it a warehouse management system? Is it a fixed asset management system? Well, don't we already have an inventory and asset database in GP? Well, we do. So our opinion is that we put it in GP. So the recap so far: scan the item when you're interacting with it, using devices that are built for this task, and put the data where it belongs. So we have 3 best practice rules here that are pretty simple to cover, and I can zip through these. 1, label your inventory or assets. 2, record the transaction as it happens to that inventory or asset. And 3, periodically confirm the accuracy via a physical count, because if something happened on steps 1 or 2, then that physical count that you would do periodically, and what you'll probably find is you're doing it far less frequently if the first 2 steps are being addressed. So the first step is label your inventory or assets. Remember, the barcode is just numbers and letters. So it's an item number, a lot code, an asset ID, it's a serial number, it's a bin. All it is a key to that database record, and that database is what's going to give you the balance of the information that's important. So because of that, the label should avoid any information that changes. So if you consider about labeling the inventory or the assets that you have in your control, you want to set it so that you have, unless there's an extreme circumstance and reason for it, you don't want a location on that label because you can move it. And you don't want a price on there because the price will change as well too. And you'll see that's why grocery stores shifted to where they're not using and putting prices on the product. They're expecting that it's going to get discovered on the shelf and at the cash register. You also want to avoid putting quantity on it unless it identifies an inseparable unit like a 10-pack, because if you've got those on the shelf and you've got single units and dozen packs, for example, you want to make it obvious for the person that's picking it to find it out. And then maybe you want to use some text to help identify or pick the part, because if a person is walking up and looking to it, they're going to read the label. So maybe it has a unit of measure, maybe it has an expiration date to guide them into taking all their product, and maybe it has the item description, which is good to have on the product, but it can be dangerous if your staff is using that for picking because so many descriptions are so similar to each other. So that's the stuff that belongs on the label. So let's talk about the barcodes themselves. These are what are known as one-dimensional barcodes, and it'll be easier to understand why when you see what a two-dimensional barcode looks like. But basically, the point is that they can be read by a line passing through the barcode. And in this case, you can see there are several different types of barcodes. There's code 3 of 9, or otherwise known as code 39. There's this interleave 2 of 5. On the right side, you'll see what are used in the retail space of UPC codes, or the European version of the European article numbering one. And then on the bottom center, you'll see this GS1-128. And the point is that there's piles of different symbologies of barcodes. And each one of them was invented for a specific purpose, and many of these are still being used now, and they're being used under different circumstances. And there's a reason why they're different, because they're sometimes suited for better things, or they're following a standard. Like the retail standard, everybody recognizes what a UPC code looks like. So the point I want to wind up making here is specifically on 2 barcodes that are on here. One is code 3 of 9. And the reason that I want to point that out, here you can see where it says 10 mil and 13 mil. And what that is describing is the width of the skinny bar that is there. Code 3 of 9 is basically a symbology that has a skinny vertical line and a wider vertical line. And the combination of those two kind of forms its own little binary Morse code to identify what each one of these numbers are. The difference on this one being that you can see that the difference of the width of the barcode as well as the text that's being represented. Code 3 of 9 is a very important barcode from the standpoint is it is the easiest barcode for you to apply to a product if you're trying to add something to a report, because it can be done through what's known as a font substitution. So I think the easiest way to think about this is if you're creating a Word document, for example, and you highlight, Michael on there and you switch it to wingdings, everybody knows what that looks like. It changes out to something that's not recognizable but can be converted back to whatever that original underlying text is. And that's somewhat similar to how this kind of barcode works. So it can take a regular piece of data, and through that changing the font on it, you will wind up representing it with the barcode. Now there's an important caveat if you're going to do this. You have to use an asterisk before and after the data, because that's the standard on which code 39 is based, is those are start and stop characters. But at any rate, that's one of the easy ways to do this. We have a blog post on that topic. If anybody cares, just holler out. But now I want to contrast this and take a look at that versus code 128. And what you'll see is for the same amount of data, code 128 is a far skinnier barcode, which means that it's a better choice to put on a label. And you can also see as well, too, that you could get that even smaller because there's less distance in between each one of the lines that's there. Code 128 is our preferred, or is our suggested barcode for putting on any label as long as you're using labeling software. So for example, if you're implementing the Panatrack or GP system, we'll wind up using the Code 128, or at least suggest that more often than not, because that is you can see you can get more things on the barcode in the same amount of space. That's pretty much what you need to know on a one-dimensional barcode. So there are two-dimensional barcodes as well too. And these basically require being read by a camera or an imager. And you can probably recognize several of these because they're probably, you know, something that you've seen before. Either the PDF 417 might be on the back of your driver's license. The QR code that's underneath it has become very popular for being able to look up a recipe online or to wind up doing something else to carry you to a website. Some of the ones that are on the right might be used by FedEx or UPS or DHL. Each one of them kind of has their own favorite flavor of the ones that they're using. The one, and I will mention too that the QR code on the bottom left here, most people now have gotten to the ability they can recognize that with those three boxes that are on here. We don't recommend using that for any inventory tracking. The reason behind that is it's become very confusing, because now if you go to, for example, a grocery store and you wind up looking on several of the boxes, what you might see is the regular one-dimensional retail barcode, and then you'll also see a QR code as well too that might say, for additional recipe ideas, you know, click here or scan this. And because of that, it's very confusing. So what we'll typically do is disable the QR code from reading, because if you are trying to scan something and a QR code is invisible field of that, we don't want you to pick that up and try and get taken to a funny website. So with all that information, we have a very intricate formula for which one to use. Use the data matrix one. That's the one that you should be using, because that's going to allow the most density of that barcode in that space. So for example, one can take on the size of a thumbnail, and you can actually put the entire Gettysburg address in many of these. Data matrix is a very solid barcode to use in a two-dimensional space, and you can also see that it could be made and rendered quite small. So it's a really good choice for this. So what about location barcodes? Well, I won't belabor this point, but be aware that there's a lot of toys that you can use in order to hang it so that you can get an easy barcode to mark a spot inside of a warehouse, whether it be on a floor or somewhere else. So I will mention too that there are some barcodes that you can see here that are very long, and on the right column, on the right side of this, you can see that there are these application identifiers, these codes. So I just want you to take a quick look at this label, and then I'm going to give you the example that's on here. On a barcode here, this is a GS1-128 barcode, which is a standard that's basically enforced. And in our software, one of the neat things that you can do is configure it so that that 01, which according to the standard means an item, and that 10 followed by the lot number, and the 17 followed by an expired date, and you can catch the rest of the stuff. So when you scan that, what we'll do on our software is we can automatically fill that data out. So now imagine the efficiency you can get by just scanning one barcode, having it parse, and then throw it in so that you can complete a transaction really fast. So how do you get barcodes on your items? Well, many vendors are already barcoding the items that they send to you. And GP can associate these vendor codes with your item code, and we make it really easy inside of our software. Or you can automatically print labels during receiving, which is another awesome time to do it as well. So using software, for example, like ours, your PO is listing the items that you expect to receive, so your chance of misidentifying an item is really conveniently limited at that moment. You may only have five items on the purchase order. Those are the only 5 we're going to show you. That'll be a great time for you to pick one of those so that you can print a label. And I will demonstrate a very fast receiving example for you here. An alternate plan for labeling, you could pre-print them for barcode using existing inventory. It's inefficient, but it's better than nothing. What I will mention is if you're going to use that, you can use SQL database views in order to make the process easier. But watch out for trailing spaces that are coming from the database. So if you're at a real geek level and you know that inside a GP, the item number, for example, is 30 characters, just be aware of the fact that there is trailing spaces in there, and those will be encoded in the barcode and cause all kinds of problems for you if you don't strip them. So possible options are products that are called Nice Label, Bartender, etc. We can help. And we've got some blog posts that might help you point you in the right direction too. As I mentioned before, you can get a barcode on a report. You can put them on pick sheets or job or service or assembly documents. You can throw them on an employee blog post. An employee badge, and we have an instructional blog post that can help you on that one too. So real fast, I'm going to give you the label printer crash course. There's 2 flavors of barcode labels. There's something known as direct thermal, which basically heats kind of a chemical ink that's embedded on a special sort of paper label. Or there's something that's called thermal transfer, which you can think of kind of like a typewriter where it transfers ink from a polymer ribbon and puts it on the label. So the first one, pick it if it's okay that your labels fade over time and you'll eventually not be able to read what's on the label after 3, 6, 9 months. It's okay that the labels are not exposed to sunlight or heat, and the labels aren't prone to friction or abuse. So with all those restrictions, thermal transfer, pick that if you like your job and you want to keep it. So your only real good choice on this case is typically thermal transfer, unless you got very temporary labels and you're not really saving any money because you're spending the money on the paper that has that special chemical ink versus regular paper and that thermal transfer ribbon. So I won't belabor at this point, but that's how thermal transfer works, and I can certainly send you that diagram if anybody cares. So what about fixed asset labels? Well, choose those asset labels carefully because the asset label has to outlive the asset itself or it won't be any use to you. So it should have something like a base adhesive because you want this thing to be sticky and not let go easy. It should have a label material that is typically made out of a plastic, a polymer, or something that you know that's going to last. But it should also have a nice protective clear laminate over the top. And because of that, you should be buying these and not printing these because it's far more cost effective to go and order these from a company that can actually create these in bulk. On the asset labels, we see 4 key transactions in order to manage your inventory. You can add a new asset, and in our world, we can optionally complete the purchase order receipt process too if you mark the purchase order item as a capital item. You can associate a new asset tag to an existing asset. So in our world, you can take a handheld device, look up your list of assets and go, okay, here's the one I want. You pull a label off the roll, you slap it on the side of the laptop, and then you use the scanner and you associate that one, and then we update GP with that information. Or you can update an existing asset with new information. So you walk up to that laptop, for example, and you scan it and it says, hey, this is Becky's laptop and I'm transferring it to Bob. Or I'm putting it from room 1 into room 7. And then you can also validate existing assets by location, which in our vernacular is really kind of it's a physical count. So I'm walking into this facility and these are the list of assets that I expect to see. And we make it easy to say, just show me the ones I haven't seen in the last 90 days so that you're not counting the same assets over and over again. So that was a very long best practice number 1. Best practice number 2 is a lot shorter. GP is designed to record inventory events after they occur. It's inefficient for real-time entry because it's not designed for it. So basically, if you think about what it takes to enter a transaction into a GP window, you got an awful lot of fields. They're awfully confusing. It takes some training to figure it out. And the sort and the path by which you're going through it is something that's just only really considered for after you know all the information. It's not designed to capture something as you're performing the real-time movement of that inventory or asset. And it's not designed to stop you from doing something stupid because it's just going to take everything that you're saying as doing it. It doesn't capture data in a convenient sequence when you're handling the item, so it doesn't consider the fact you might be standing over a pallet of something and that you've only got one hand in order to capture this piece of information. So instead of a batch system, a transactional system captures the when and the where the activity occurs. It records the activity at the point it happened and not later from a piece of paper that got forwarded into the office. It prompts the user in the correct sequence when handling the items. It provides a real-time notification that you're about to do something stupid, and it's usually way easier to learn. And I just want to give an example here. I've got a 90-second video of what it looks like to use, for example, a Panatrack or GP software to perform a receiving transaction.
Let's take a quick look at a receiving transaction using the efficiency of barcode scanning. The purchase order is validated against GP in real time. Easily scan each item and capture the quantity received. If a barcode isn't available, I have the option to look up the data with a lookup list. Lookup lists add additional information such as item quantities for the user. Easily capture serial numbers for items set up as serial tracked in Dynamics. If you have inventory that is lot tracked, We prompt the user to capture the lot number and details based on how you want your inventory set up tracked. A review screen can be accessed at any time during the capture of the transaction. When the transaction is ready to be submitted, it is immediately created in Dynamics.
So in this example here, you can see how simple it was in order to be able to take things in the right order, to be able to hurry up and capture many serial numbers, lot information, bulk tracked information, and get a transaction in GP in real time. So the rest of our transactions are following a very similar format, and they're using very similar types of hardware, etc. That was best practice number 2. Best practice number 3, periodically confirm your inventory accuracy by way of a GP stock count, and use barcode scanning to quickly count without paper. So in this instance here, we have a stock count that we've got set up, the same one that you're using in GP, but instead of going through and printing paper, distributing the sheets, going and doing all that stuff and turning it into this big production, you can get a smaller production going and basically go and do sectional counts very easily. And if you do have things like lots, it's far easier because now you can scan it. And one of the things we do as well too is that if there are serial numbers and you know that if you say, if GP knows that you have 10 serial numbers and we're saying how many of these items do you count and you say 10, we'll bypass the problem of going through and getting all 10 of them. But if it turns out that you come back and you go 9 or 11, we're going to start querying for data here in order to figure out which of the serial numbers went missing. So given all that one, how should you evaluate a barcode system? Well, there's 2 options for barcoding systems. There's ones that are called data collection, which basically glues a mobile barcode scanner to GP's fields and does what's kind of called screen scraping. And there's a standalone system, which is basically yet another system that sends periodic summarized updates to GP. The problem we have with the standalone system is your data is now stored somewhere else. And we are always of the opinion if a guy's got 2 watches, he never knows what time it is. So we want to avoid the problem of having to reconcile. You can trust the data that's in GP when you're putting the data in properly. So we're kind of sort of a hybrid of both of those. We like to call ourselves embedded, where the host data remains in GP, but we can go past that by adding some certain independent features. We have the benefit of being directly connected to GP. We're warehouse management system-like, but we avoid the problem of a separate system to reconcile. And what's nice about being able to take some actions down the path of being embedded is that we can also add some additional features in as well too. For example, one of the features that we have that's very popular is something that's called a direct transfer, which if you consider it is sort of like an internal sales order to transfer something from one warehouse to another. So that plays real nicely in retail or in some of the other facilities where you have a central warehouse and you have somebody at a remote site that's going, I really need 14 widgets and 32 gizmos and whatever it is. And we can capture the information or the request of what they want and create an internal order to move it. And the process of picking that and tracking that's actually quite simple. So implementation considerations, if somebody is to be putting in a system and you want to kind of think ahead, create a good wireless network. So good coverage throughout the warehouse or the office or wherever you're trying to keep control of your stuff is important. This has become very much a common thing now because pretty much everybody wants to be able to have a wireless signal or be able to take their laptop to different spots throughout their facility. And I will say there's a reason why consumer-grade access points are only $50. If you go to Best Buy and you wind up buying a $30 Linksys or a $50 Netgear item, you'll wind up finding that they don't necessarily have the range, nor were they intended to have the manageability. So you don't need to spend thousands of dollars. A good pro-grade or business-grade access point can only be $200 or $300 or sometimes more depending on what you want. But they're intended to have a longer distance and you'll cover more of them with fewer devices. So some of the geeky things to consider here is things that are like preemptive roaming, things that are paying attention to channel selection and alternate bands. And I will explain preemptive roaming because that is kind of a common thing that is a real smart thing to consider. If you have one of the industrial handheld devices, the barcode scanners, just like the ones that I showed before, and the ones that if you walk around Target or Walmart or any warehouse, you'll see those. and you pair those with a good business class access point, what they can often do is something that's called preemptive roaming, and I kind of described that as Tarzan being smart instead of being on the jungle floor. So if you think about what happens is you start walking away from one of the access points, either because you're on a fork truck or because this thing is in your hand and you're trying to follow or look for something in a warehouse. One of the things that it does is, in many scenarios where you don't have preemptive roaming, it will keep trying to listen to the access point, to that radio, until it finally has no more signal left. It drops the signal, and then it goes, oh, I got to find another access point so that I can connect to. And the problem with that is that you start degrading the quality of your signal, and you may wind up coming off the network for just a brief period of time, but that's still enough to really create kind of some frustration. Instead, preemptive roaming kind of takes the step where it's like Tarzan swinging to the vine. He was smart enough to grab the next vine before he let go of the old vine, and that's exactly what preemptive roaming does. The other thing to consider is you may be in an office park like we are, where you've got several neighbors that have various wireless networks as well, and you can steer around some of those wireless conflicts as well too if you planned ahead. So one of the things in our world is the network bandwidth is less important. We're not streaming video to these devices. We're just looking to capture some simple transactions. But latency is important, and by latency we mean how long does it take for the network to stay awake and how long does it take for that handheld to communicate back. It's really not that tough. If you do need capability for performing some remote transactions in the field, we do have a subset of extended offline transactions which do not require a network, and instead they sync to and from the handheld device. So some suggested selection criteria. Is your solution, whatever you're putting in place, is it using a single system of truth, or will it live separately and require reconciliation? Our suggestion is use GP. Does the product have critical mass? And namely by that we mean, is there evidence of ongoing support for GP's host system updates? Is there a track record of product enhancements? Is the vendor truly partnered with the connecting system? So you can find a lot of systems that might be out there that are connecting to 100 different things, and that's because they're keeping their data separate. And they've built some connectors that maybe once every hour or maybe every few minutes or maybe every day will synchronize this stuff back and get it into the host system. But that's not really giving you what you want. Now you've got a reconciliation issue as well that you're trying to figure out what you're going to do with. The other important thing is, can the product scale upwards when you grow? Was it architected to handle your growth? And I can tell you that many of them aren't. Was data security considered, because you are releasing a certain device that is now going into the hands of someone else? And is it easy to implement and support? So with that, and this is the only part of the real commercial here as I'll close on this one, is why Panatrack? Well, we've built a product that's powerful yet simple to operate. We have created it to be scalable from one user to 100 plus users. And one of the things we're very proud of is that we can get it up and running in hours, not months. We've got a strong track record of many happy customers. We understand inventory and assets because it's really all we do. And we understand dynamics very well as well too. And if you have some further interest in trying to understand how some of this might be used inside of a facility, we have a white paper that I'd be happy to distribute or point you to that's called Making the Most of Inventory Management, where several of the topics, at least from an inventory standpoint, are covered. And we do have another one for fixed assets as well too. So with that, I will toss it over to see if there's any questions. I have contact information for me on the bottom and also for Michelle at Turnkey Technologies as well on the bottom right. Brad, anything to, any questions that you want to try and facilitate? Brad?
Sorry about that, Mike. I had my microphone muted there. I apologize.
No, not a problem.
Yep, we do have a couple questions. Do you sell scanners and hardware as well?
Yep, and most of our customers, they do acquire hardware through us, but we don't require that you purchase it through us. So we do aim to sell hardware from Motorola and Zebra and Intermec and Honeywell, so that tends to be who makes the scanners and the printers. We do sell them at a very competitive price, and the benefit of that one is you're only dealing with one vendor, so you really only have one throat to choke. But we do also have customers, some of the larger ones, that may have already had a relationship with a provider of those kind of toys, and we can work with them directly. We just need to confirm all the details to make sure that they're providing hardware that meets what we think is efficient workflow and that works with our software. And the other thing too is the good question on purchasing hardware is know that leasing is an option for both the hardware and the software, and we do have customers that do that as well. So instead of making one payment up front that kind of commits everything, that leasing is a great way to have a monthly payment that allows you to hit your ROI in a nice kind of balance.
Okay. And then what does the implementation process look like? Can you describe how this type of system is put in place?
Yep. So in our world here, what a typical implementation process looks like is we have various internal meetings with our professional services team and our sales agent in here to make sure that our ducks are in a row before we even talk to pretty much anybody else after we know that someone is committed to the system. We want to make sure that everybody's got a quality experience, so then we'll usually start off with a kickoff call with those that are involved and make various confirmations of the assumptions, coordinate timing, organize the scanners, the printers, and then work with the customer, the partner, to make sure that we have some fairly simple server prerequisites covered. We almost always do the installation of our software remotely and do some brief techie admin training as part of that process. And then we get one or more of the handhelds configured, get some confirmation that everything's working, and then coordinate training on whatever modules have been purchased. And it's not at all unusual that we're asked to come on site to take a deeper look at creating workflow efficiencies, especially on our inventory product. And that's really, we think, one of the best ways to leverage the system to the fullest, because our real goal is to drive efficiency and save time and save dollars throughout the process, instead of what we say, just don't help them do stupid things faster, help them do the right things faster.